Hello, everyone. We're going to be talking about using a scribbling technique to create a rendering. And this drawing that I did for this video took me about 4 hours to create, and I've broken it down into 4 1-hour sections. As you can see, the technique that we're using and we'll be using incorporates the use of very fine delicate scribbles that gather over time to create the image. Now, of course, this is speeded up, so the pencil's moving very rapidly across the paper. But nonetheless, when I made these drawings, or this drawing, and when I work in this fashion, I move the pencil very rapidly anyways, and then make very, very light marks. And notice I'm kind of addressing the whole format of the drawing as well, not just kind of focusing on one area. So what the drawing depicts a pear. So I'm doing a life observation drawing, so I'm looking at the pear as I draw. But the technique here is such that you just have to be patient and let the drawing grow kind of on its own. And what I'm doing is I'm allowing these lines to kind of accumulate in order to create the sense of form in the drawing. Now, one of the main objectives of this way of drawing is to focus on form before shape. And if that kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive, I guess, but what that means is that I'm thinking about the lights and darks in the drawing before I'm thinking primarily about the shape of the thing. So as I'm kind of moving this pencil across the surface, I'm just kind of almost sculpting in a certain way, feeling my way through the drawing and bundling these scribbles in such a way that I'm trying to gain mass and, like I say, form before I gain an overt sense of shape, even though you can kind of start to see the shape of the pear emerging here. Now, the key here is to draw lightly. It's the same kind of general technique as a parallel or cross-hatching technique where you're using marks, that are kind of overlapping each other or sitting very close to each other to create a sense of value in the drawing. So it's kind of the same technique as that. The only difference is it's a more randomized sort of approach. So it gives you a certain kind of liberty and freedom, I think, that parallel hatching, even though I like parallel hatching and cross hatching, but this technique gives you a little bit more freedom than those techniques do in terms of kind of rendering edge and kind of moving the pencil around as need be to create the image. Now, the one thing that you need to think about here is as you're making this drawing is to pace yourself and not go too quickly. Because if you push too hard with the pencil, it'll the scribbles will be too dark and you won't be able to hide them. The trick here is to hide older marks by a succession of newer marks on top of it. We're coming up to about an hour's worth of drawing here now, and what I'll do is I'll probably stop here for a second and we'll kind of look at the image as it's developing. You can see just a little bit of the kind of what we call the cast shadow area below the pear starting to emerge a little bit, so I'm kind of defining the edge of the pear by darkening in the area below it. And obviously you can kind of see what's called the modeling shadow start to emerge. That's the idea of light raking across kind of a rounded surface, in this case the kind of spherical surface of the pear. So obviously the light in this drawing is coming in from the left-hand side of the drawing, hitting the pear on the left-hand side, and the shadow, the modeling shadow or the form shadow, is being created on the right-hand side of the pear. And then, of course, the cast shadow being projected down, onto the surface below the pear. Now, when you're drawing in this way, what you need to think about is this idea of the direction of light, and you'll need to really, when you make your drawing, you're going to have to really think carefully about that idea of positioning the light in such a way that you're getting a kind of a cross light on the form. And you could use a daylight, a window, or a lamp, or whatever, but make sure that you're controlling the light and that you're getting the light moving across the form at an angle. Obviously, the light's moving in from the kind of upper left, if you can kind of start to see that happening in this drawing. Now notice the relative contrast that's starting to emerge there. You can kind of, as I noted, start to see the bottom of the pear start to emerge, because I'm going a little darker, just a tad darker, along that the underneath part of it, right? So we're starting to get a little bit of sense of what's called, and you'll see it a little bit later, a sense of what's called reflected light. So what's happening is that light is moving down from the upper left, right, and it's hitting the paper, or the tabletop upon which the pear is sitting, and then the light's bouncing back up again and coming in underneath the pear just a little bit, and that'll be a little bit more obvious later on. So, a lot of operations going on here. The building up of relative value, hinting at shape, right, obviously, but more than that, thinking about the form of the object before shape, as I mentioned before. I'm not really kind of cleaning up those edges yet. I didn't go in and draw the shape of the thing and color it in. I tend to find that, particularly if you're just starting out drawing, that, the tendency is to draw the shape of something and just color it in. So what tends to happen is that the drawing comes across as kind of flat in that regard. This approach, however, form comes first. So you're always aware of the dimensionality of the object you're rendering, the sense of weight, the presence of the object before you're kind of worried about the shape of it. Now, the trick, as I said, is to kind of render this thing in such a way that the pencil marks build up over time and create that sense of value, that shift in value, and also a sense of density, by the way, in terms of energy of the drawing, right? Notice I'm holding my pencil back at the back of the pencil, and just gently touching the paper with the tip of the pencil. Now we're coming up to about 2 hours into the drawing now, and you can kind of see I'm starting to kind of ramp up the values a little bit more as I go. It takes a lot of patience. So let's look at this for a second and see what's going on here. A little more intensity of the cast shadow on the bottom right behind the pear, and a little more intensity on the modeling shadow on the back of the pear. So I'm getting a much more kind of contrasty feel to the back of the pear versus the background itself, which is a little lighter there, right? So as I develop the drawing, I will kind of focus in on, ramping up these values as I develop the drawing. Now, people are just starting out in terms of learning how to draw. They'll panic a little bit, and what they would do is right off the bat, they would jump right to those really dark values, right, and want to really kind of lock the drawing in at that point. This technique, if you do it right, doesn't allow you to do that, because you're moving around the drawing constantly when you make these drawings. So it's really important that you think about that as you develop the drawing. This kind of universal sort of kind of vibe that's going on. And in this case, and in a lot of the things that we've talked about, it's seeing the, some people can't, see the overall relationships because they're so honed in on this notion of detail, right? This technique is kind of counterintuitive in that regard, because you're moving across the entire paper constantly and trying to resolve the whole thing all at once, rather than focusing in on one particular area and darkening that in. That's the advantage of taking this approach over drawing the outline of something and then just kind of mindlessly coloring it in, till it's filled in, wholly, and then, voila, you're done with the work, and then you end up with something that's kind of a little bit stiff in its overall vibe. Here, taking this approach, almost you could call the drawing done at any it kind of has this totality to it as you develop it, right? Nothing sticks out like a sore thumb as being, done too fast or anything like that, because I'm working the whole drawing all at once. So there you can kind of see I'm starting to define and hone the edge a little bit more on the front part of the pear. I haven't really kind of gone in and really crispened up the lines, nor probably I will I do that in a really refined sense. If I spent another 8 hours on the drawing, maybe I could, but I probably wouldn't do that. So just kind of cleaning up the edges just a little bit. You can see they're still ambiguous. And when you think about it, that's the nature of existence. It's the nature of the world that we live in. The way we confront the world is not in terms of flat shapes, but in terms of this kind of constant movement of forms throughout space, and also, constant shifting of forms. The deterioration of forms. Nothing is static, right, in the world. So this drawing technique kind of lends itself to that in a couple of ways. One of which is this notion of bundling of these little marks, right? Kind of evocative of molecules or atoms vibrating. So you kind of have this quality in this drawing. Now we're coming up on the fourth hour here, so we've gone 3 hours into this drawing. So now, you can kind of see I've really ramped up the value, the darks and the lights. I'm starting to kind of clean up those edges as I go. Still not 100% kind of outline going on there, nor will I, get to that point, because I like to kind of keep it open in that regard. But just kind of ramping things up a little bit, just hanging out, in certain areas to get a little bit more darkness. You can push a little harder when you get comfortable with the dark areas, but also the trick is you're just kind of you're just kind of letting those marks accumulate more. You're just hanging out in the dark areas, that's all. Now that's kind of the first little line that I put in there. So see how I kind of clean that edge up from the outside in? So I kind of put the line and then backfilled into the cast shadow area. So as I was saying, this and still there, so you also see how I kind of shifted that edge a little bit. I kind of lowered the bottom of the pear just a little bit and then backfilled into the cast shadow area. But this technique is, again, like I said, kind of evocative of that notion of vibration, right? And that's the beauty of it. Oftentimes, students want to go in with a graphite pencil and then blend all that stuff in with their finger or a blending stump. I tend to not to like to take that approach in terms of graphite drawing. I like to build it up over a long period of time because it reveals a much more kind of nuanced, subtle kind of way of drawing. If you kind of blend, if you were to kind of blend now, if I took a stump and kind of blended a thing, I would undo all that kind of fine energy that's in the work, right? So a drawing is about representation, it's about content and ideas, but it's also about energy, and this this notion of the chaotic moving to the organized, which is the scribble, right? That's something that's very significant in art, and in other endeavors as well. And the scribble lends itself to that, by the way. There's kind of this. If you look closely at this drawing, it would just be, just kind of lines and marks going everywhere, very chaotic. But you back up, just like, looking at a monitor, a TV screen, back up from it makes sense. Get close to it, it's just a bunch of dots, right? So same thing here, in a certain way. Now, see, I'm kind of just put in that little mark or that little gash in the surface of the pear. It's just a little line, and I kind of shaded on one side and left a highlight on the other, so it kind of creates this indentation in the pear. So we're kind of coming up on the end of the 4-hour drawing here. So no erasing. This is all additive. Okay, so you got to be careful not to smudge, so you don't have the luxury to erase away any mistakes you make. So you've got to move very, very slowly. This kind of, as I sped this up, it doesn't kind of reveal the real speed at which this thing is created. So you got to be very, very patient with this. Because there's no erasing, you can't subtract. So you add by, you subtract by adding, right? So I've added the darkness on the middle of that pear and the bottom of the pear. So the bottom of the pear looks light relative to that, right? It looks like there's a little bit of light bouncing up underneath that. I didn't erase that. It's just me making the other areas darker. That's called relative value, right? So just kind of cleaning up the edges here just a little bit, not everywhere. Just kind of leaving some ambiguous areas, some areas that are cleaned up. And we're getting real close to finishing up here, I think. Yep. So you can look at, really ramped up the value, really ramped up all the other, values underneath, on top, and cleaned edges up just by backfilling, right? By putting a little bit of line down and backfilling, whether into the pear or underneath in the cast shadow area. There's a couple things I want you to think about here at the end of this, video. So you got to make thousands of very light marks. Hold the pencil at a 45-degree angle very lightly in your hand. Use the weight of the pencil to make the marks. No erasing or rubbing. And move slowly. And remember, there's still structural issues there. So you got to do visual measurement and approximate angles, as you develop the drawing. Okay, thanks much.